Namaste. Happy Sabbath. I'm gonna keep this one fairly brief if I can. What are you doing?
I'm playing Roblox.
Okay, go play Roblox then. Right. Every time I broadcast, it's like you was gonna hijack my broadcast or something. Hello, first viewer. Hello. Namaste. Yeah, this is a subject that needs to be talked about again and again and again because we're going through it right now, people. The whole world, our country, each individual state, county, in my case, parish, city, block, family, and individual within that family are all going through it. Uh, I think we just need to sometimes remember that just because we're not going through it at the level of another person right now. So, no, I'm not the kid in Palestine or Israel whose house was just bombed and watched my parents die under a bunch of rubble because of a fight that's been going on for, I don't know, thousands of years, right? This is the reality of the world that we live in. This is the reality of life in our country. There's about to be a movie, 3 movies released about Black Wall Street. And I didn't realize until I read an article off of maybe Facebook that it was a few black females that preserved that story, written and part of it orally, so that we can fully, as best we can, because we're not there, preserve that history. And to me, this is another example of the effects of loss. What's the long term repercussions of loss? We're just getting to the look. I'm 52 years old. I'm from the South, African American. Took history classes, college. No, not in college, in high school, but been a student of history my whole life. Was going to major in history in college. Definitely am a student of the civil rights movement in America. Never heard nothing about no Black Wall Street my whole life until a few years ago. So, off the rip, what I'm implying that the first way people deal with loss is to bury it deep down in the catacombs of the libraries, newspapers, earth, our minds. And understand that this is a natural human instinct to bury what we don't like. Okay? This is an instinct that has evolved with us over probably millions of years so that we can function, so we think, at the optimal level possible during catastrophes, during loss, like Hurricane Katrina, which I wasn't in, but I was in one before that, where we got evacuated to the Superdome. Death, dismemberment, etc., etc. This is an instinct, okay? The first thing on the battlefield the soldier does after his comrade falls is pick up his sword and continue to fight. We don't stop at that point in time and say, let me think about the loss I've just incurred on this battlefield. That ain't the way we function. That ain't the way we're built. One thing I've learned by being a student of war, art of war, is that you have to survey the battlefield and know what assets are on the battlefield before you can successfully negotiate how you're going to win the battle. Before you can come up with an accurate mental picture of what the fight's gonna look like. Okay. So loss is a part of battles, it's a part of everyday life. It's actually so deeply ingrained in the nature of reality that the Buddha, for instance, had to talk about it from the standpoint of impermanence. And when you look at the concept of something being impermanent, not substantial, not lasting, that is a type of loss from a psychological standpoint. Now, let me bring it back a couple of degrees of freedom, as we say in quantum mechanics. Sorry, quantum mechanic joke. But if you look at it from just death, that's obviously a good example of loss. I took a class called Death and Dying, and we used the book written by Kubler Ross. And I was in college when I took this class, Death and Dying. Great class. So happy I took it as an undergrad because I never was introduced to Kubler Ross in medical school. They only have so much time in medical school to teach you so many things. So they can't teach you everything. You got to take some of that. There's a reason you have a pre-med degree before you go to medical school. Some of that stuff you need to learn before you come, and some of it you learn after you leave. So there's that. But at any rate, it took me some time as a student of psychology, medicine, et cetera, a spiritual person trying to learn how to navigate this hectic world I live in, this brutal last world I live in. Let's be honest about that. Let's not sugarcoat Shanola and shit. Let's just say what it is. You know, we got our big boy pants on today. We're sitting at the table amongst adults, hopefully, who agree that we can wear our big boy pants today and say things as we see it. But when I took Kubler Ross, that was the first time I had been exposed to death and dying and those concepts in college. And the main there was many. My understanding was that the whole journey for Kubler Ross was pretty profound too. How Kubler Ross came to understand this process, and obviously, if you want to keep it 100, Kubler Ross wasn't the first person to talk about death and dying. I mean, we have I don't know how many world religions who have as their main topic what's the human condition before you stop breathing and after you stop breathing. Okay, I mean, so it's not like this shouldn't have been. I'm gonna just say how I feel. This shouldn't have been some great revelation, but the way it was put together and packaged, coming from modern science for this time in the age that Kubler Ross lived in, wasn't a new understanding or a repackaging, if you will, of probably beliefs that we've had throughout time. But psychology and spirituality to me are just two. They're just pole. It's just to me it depends on the degree of polarity. Okay, as you get closer to the point where language fails, spirituality is a more useful tool. If you're in a reality where language is the norm, then science is a useful tool, and so is language and um, philosophy, et cetera, et cetera. What if we just live like bears and dish toads? Well, what's up, Jeff? Good Saturday morning, bro. Yeah, if only the one thing I learned from medical school was called statistical spreads, and it's not likely under this bell curve of human behavior gonna happen anytime soon. It will be war till the population dwindle down to well, we're likely gonna do that anyway, Jeff. When think about it. When have human beings been able to not use war and war as a means of population control? It's really, if you want to talk about war, you gotta look at the animals too. And it's like when there get to be too many gazelles, the lions go crazy. They like we eating today, and ain't nobody crying about it. I'm just telling you my observations, okay? This is just my observations as a naturalist, the man that loves to go out in nature and just look at stuff, okay, talk about it, which is a form of recording what I see. This morning I was outside looking at the bird feeder, and I was pouring water in the bird feeder, and I noticed the robins were staring at me. And I told my son, "You see that? Look, he's looking at you put water in the fucking bird feeder. He knows what you're doing. And he will be here later to get some of that water, you know? He's a naturalist too. Human beings have never look, we made the atomic bomb. It got used real quick. How quick after it was created? A few years? I don't know about gunpowder, but I think it took a little bit longer to make a decent firearm before we could really implement gunpowder the way we do now on the battlefield. Yeah, supply and demand. Yep, supply supply and demand of resources. Demand far outweighs supply. Scarce resources in our populated world. Yeah, maybe, but I was told many years ago that the whole concept of scarcity depends on how you look at it. I was told that the concept of scarcity depended on which nation and how the system of resource distribution is set up. Because I was told, first of all, like as far as see something like trash. Okay, this is an example of how you can think about the thing. I was told that you could put all the trash in the whole freaking world in an area way less than the size of one big state like Texas. And I was like, oh, hmm. If you think about it, that whole big floating flotilla of trash in the Pacific Ocean, which is a huge country, us, full of people's trash, is not the size of a whole state yet. Maybe it's a small city. I don't know how big it is. But the point is this: when people tell you there's a scarcity of resources, it has to be put into context. A scarcity of resources because there's not the physical material available, or because of the way that it's distributed and the systems that are in place to distribute things based on what? Monetary value, resources to distribute the goods and services around the world, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of, if you talk to somebody in Beverly Hills about scarcity, they gonna talk about their Gouda cheese running out, you know, and they special kind of lattes, and that's just a damn catastrophe. They're gonna say, yeah, we got to do something about this. But if you go talk to the Bushman or the Aboriginal, they might say, it'd be nice to have, you know, some lights at nighttime and maybe access to running water be nice, but we ain't complaining about it because we Aboriginals, and I have Aboriginal ancestry in my recent past, I think, because I had a DNA analysis, so I find that very interesting. But anyway, this sense of lack, you see, the concepts that I'm talking about, understand as I talk. I need you guys to understand this because it makes the whole life of the whole planet better, not just me. Every concept I'm talking about applies to mental, physical, individual, family, neighborhood, city, state, county, country, world. That it's that level of abstraction that's always being alluded to. You know, lack, scarcity. The scarcity that human beings have of, for instance, compassion is. I know that's a huge jump from an actual physical resource, but it's just an example of a something that we lack as human beings, and it's because of how we practice. And I'm saying there is a correlation between that and the physical. We The reason people in America don't like socialism, I feel, is because we've been taught that a man that does a certain amount of work is entitled to and has a right to X amount of resources. Period. As my sister would say, period. Oh, is it freezing? Oh man. Let me know if it continues to freeze. I can always start and restop it. I got good bars on my end, so I'm not sure. But I still got juice, so we good, we good. But yes, get in the habit of always doing, oh good, what the 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 microscopist does. That when you use your scanning lens to look at the whole surface of the object, then you zoom in with your big 100,000 power, well, 1,000 power if you got a Tasco microscope like I had. I think it would go from 100 to 1,000 magnification, maybe several thousands, but this is the way you should use the mind always. And understand this, that most people don't know that's the way you should use the mind when you talk about, when you contemplate things. Period. Period. Not just the monks and the the priests or the monks. That's who does the contemplative work, right? The contemplative work consists of looking at the big picture and looking at the infinitesimally small interactions, interplays, you know. And when you look at reality like that, I think you get a better view. I mean, if you're a physician, you don't miss diseases, which people love. And since medicine is a field that deals with looking at data, analyzing it, and coming up with truth, I'm going to say that if you can't see the big picture and the smaller picture at the same time, you really shouldn't be in positions of leadership in government. You shouldn't be in positions of leadership in medicine, in social sciences, because you're a liability to somebody. Okay. You need to be taught how to create uh, models, models in your mind and on paper and in the computers, that are realistic, that represent what's actually going on in reality. And you should be able to do it from a big scale and then go down to a smaller scale. Engineers, certain disciplines do this in their minds. There are formal classes I heard in engineering on forming models in your mind. It's a skill that's useful, but I'm gonna say it's necessary for growth, just as a human being. So the sense of lack and scarcity, um, I'm gonna say it's like most things, it's true to a point, and then there's a point where it wouldn't be true if different conditions on the earth were present. Different conditions like the way we distribute goods, the amount of stuff that first world countries like America, Europe, Canada want access to, and the lengths we're willing to go to get it. Okay, so I want my 5 lattes and my 4 cars and my rare European, or North African rugs or whatever it is you want. Well, the resources you just took to get one African rug, let's just be honest about this, will most definitely feed a family in a third world country for weeks or months. And if you and forget the I deserve this, I work for it. Just forget that for a second and just talk about what's more important. Just is it several families with children having access to food, or me having access to rugs? Now, when you get to the nitty gritty core, some people will say, well, both those things, both those things to the peoples involved in the situations, have a what am I trying to say? They would say that the necessity of your rugs at that point in your life was the main thing that you were dealing with. Okay, and you weren't dealing with the homelessness, so it's not fair to compare the two things. But what I'm saying is that when you have unequal distribution and unequal utilization, look, there's a reason we don't let people. There's certain times when they will limit what you can buy, especially I want to say in the wartime in World War II in America in the Great Depression. I've heard about limits put on you can buy this much that. Certainly, the military knows about this because if they don't do it, somebody's going to die. If we run out of food and gasoline, we're all going to die. So, military is really good at better than some institutions at allocating resources. But resource allocation is it is something that an advanced civilization, an enlightened civilization, puts a lot of thought and resources into because it understands that look outside. Look at all the trucks constantly running back and forth. Look at all the airplanes in the sky. A huge number of those are there simply to get stuff from here to there. So getting stuff from here to there takes up a huge amount of oil, gasoline, resources, manpower. So when people got to have their 20 lattes and 8 cars all the time, guess what happens to the whole, eh, you know, guess what happens to the resources for distribution? They get pulled into different areas disproportionately, and it would take too much time to get into why that happens. It's kind of like the guns, germs, and steel hypothesis. You know, we won the game. We want the lattes. We got the resources to get the lattes, so that's fair. You know, that's why you have to be open minded because every one of these situations involves a level that always involves every level. It involves family units, individuals, countries, and long spans of history and behaviors that have been in belief systems that have been passed down that are being tested right now. Socialism versus democracy is being tested right now. And which one is going to predominate? It depends. To the victor goes the spoils from one standpoint. But in this case, the victor may be, especially since we got pandemic, pestilence, war, famine, right? So which system has the greatest capacity to prevent war, pestilence, famine, disease? That is an observation that can be made by rational minds, by lucid minds that survey huge spans of history and are trained in science and mathematics and philosophy and politics. Okay, these are the minds you really want to have discourse with when you're trying to make these kind of decisions, because these decisions turn into policy, and these decisions turn into laws that's on your books. They turn into how you police your communities. They turn into, you know, what approach to healthcare your community state has, as far as who gets access to it and how much it's going to cost them. How much it's going to cost them depends on those systems. Canadian system has its advantages, disadvantages. This capitalist system has its advantages, disadvantages. And so we have to, and it's very difficult to find the point where the needle is balanced. I mean, if it was easy to find the point where the needle was balanced, we wouldn't need Buddhism. Okay, we wouldn't need it because we could easily figure out the point at which we have balanced view, equanimity, right? A viewpoint that is coming from a place that is not skewed by opinions and people that are completely immersed in aversion and attraction, right? Want, which they think is a need, et cetera, et cetera. We want our decisions to come from a place where people aren't heavily influenced by that. And it happens all the time. In the workplace, everyone's trying to be fair and partial, but everybody's got their own problems. You got your own rent you got to pay, you got your own relationships. You come from a different region where people do things a different way. You never seen XYZ before. All these different, I mean, if you look at how many different um, factors prevent human beings from practicing good equanimity, it's a lot. It's a lot. We're indoctrinated almost from birth into a language and a way of doing things socially, psychologically, spiritually in a country. Don't even get me started on ethnicity and race, because that's it. But it's all it's all tied together. And that indoctrination also, I mean, where does the workforce come from? Me and my wife were talking yesterday about how the workplace, between how the millennials approach things and how Generation X, and it's so clear to me now. I totally see how. I told her, I said, I have a little bit more a rougher time when I deal with younger nurses than with the older ones. And why is that? Well, it's rather obvious to me. I come from a generation that was taught XYZ, and these people coming from another generation are taught XYZ. Here's the thing, though. If we don't find the middle ground always, the place where the needle is balanced, then when one generation phases out, the very best that that generation had to offer, as far as philosophy, metaphysics, science, social science, how do you really raise a family properly and have a very balanced sort of a psyche in the individuals that come out of that family, a psyche that leads to peaceful coexistence with the people in the community, the country, and the world. How do you do that? That's what you're risking if you don't realize that each generation has some great contribution that hopefully it's allowed to make before it moves, because each generation is really, if you want to look at it from a metaphysical spiritual standpoint, is another generation that's just updated. It ain't. Please don't think that if you're a Generation X or a baby boomer or millennial, please don't think that you're creating something that's just so fresh and so clean that ain't nobody ever seen it before. Because that's bullshit. There's a saying that there's nothing new under the sun, and that's true. That's true. Why? Well, go look at the basic cosmology, metaphysics of the system we're using to talk about this. Christianity and Buddhism, from my standpoint, and science, which is actually linked to both. Yeah, both of those. Yeah, most definitely. I had to think about it for a second. So the perception of newness also is, because every generation does the same thing. Like, well, you guys don't know anything, and you young guys are all stupid. You old guys are all slow. You don't do things fast enough. You know, I think generation after generation has dealt with this, and this is just another manifestation of generational psychology, but also the systems in the world influence that generation. Baby boomer generation, or the greatest generation we call them, the World War II generation, they were up against conditions that really threatened the existence of the free world. Period. And they had to come together and sacrifice in a way that has not been seen in the modern world very often, if at all. If at all. Please show me another example of that level of altruism and bravery, camaraderie, and sacrifice on that scale in the past 100 years, 200 years. Show me. Show me where human beings put all their bullshit aside for a period of time. That many human beings come together to fight one common enemy that threatened the freedom of the world. Even who was it? Ronald Reagan said it. Jimmy Carter, Reagan. He said, "I wonder what would happen." This is where the conspiracy theorists, alien conspiracy theorists, come up with their theory that he knew something, because when he said, "If we had a common enemy, would it not unite us?" And I'm not saying that the conspiracy theorists are wrong, because I have my questions about that too. Okay, yeah, we do become united when there's a common enemy, but look what's happened with COVID. So you can't use that as this always happens, because it doesn't. Sometimes when a common enemy shows its face, disease, war, it divides people. Actually, it divides people before it unites them. Just go look at it. Go look at how it plays out. Is this what's this? No, what's this? Is this the same one?
No, just break my car open.
You don't need it? I'm about to go dead. That's what I need it. He used the one on the side of the chair, right? Yeah, use this one. So had to get some juice. Yeah, we have to. The reason it's difficult to practice good, solid, well, altruism comes to mind, equanimity, is because to see things from so many different standpoints with your conscious, waking, cognitive mind is pretty much impossible. But it's okay, because our religions, our spiritual systems gave us the answer to that problem. Okay, the answer to that problem looks something like: keep your mouth shut, your mind open, your heart open, react appropriately at the appropriate time. And if you do that, as you interact with the world and humanity, even without knowing all these perspectives, slowly, the miracle, if you will, is that you slowly learn what you need to do without having it written in a book, without having some rules stuck up your ass every time you turn around, without having the law dogs draw down on you in the car when you telling them you already got a permit for the gun, and you ain't trying to shoot nobody. It prevents, makes less likely. It doesn't prevent 100%. It makes these sort of just completely mind-boggling situations that have happened it makes them less likely to happen. Everybody knows this. So, just recently with me, I'll just tell you, look, going back after to work after a cardiac arrest and going into a stressful environment, it's tough, man. It's tough. What we take for granted, like our cognitive abilities, and the thing of it is this: I knew these lessons were coming. I didn't know when. I didn't know when, but I knew they were coming. But any human being that's just using intellect, cognition, if that's your only approach towards learning spiritual lessons like equanimity, altruism, open mindedness, open heartedness, you're gonna fail. You're gonna fail. I have patients in the hospital and have come across in the past and recently have patients that have pretty advanced dementia. Okay, which means that they can't process information the way they could when they were younger. Okay, and yeah, if you're a person who I've never had a stroke before, I had more like something that would be like a concussion that a football player gets when he gets racked up really well. But at least it gives me perspective, you see. And all of us have had some situation where we weren't 100% mentally, you know. People that drink alcohol too much and get in trouble know exactly what I'm talking about. And people that use drugs, the ones that aren't completely spun out of their minds and hear this type of message, maybe you know what I'm talking about. But alcohol is a drug, people. Make no mistake about it. But yeah, again, going back to this need to be able to scan the field, look at things from a different perspective. This is what the value of education is. This is the value of the arts too. And this is the value of our spiritual traditions. Each one of these institutions is an opportunity for a human being to have an experience that's a lot of times outside of their normal. Because everybody's gravitating towards their normal, which doesn't exist. There is no such thing as normal. You have to understand that. Because if I come from Bubble Planet and we eat squares and we all live in a two-dimensional plane and we only think with, you know, um, three or four brain neurons, but that's all we really need because we live in the flat plane of, geometry, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, this would be similar to the book that came out about, was it Flat Earthers? There was a book like this that was out. I think it was related to well, it wasn't talking about, it wasn't Gulliver's Travels. No, it wasn't that book. But this is how people that want to think about multi dimensions get into how can you think about multi dimensions. The people that live on a flat plane, okay, the flat earthers, and they're stick people, but they don't know it, okay, and they're walking around, and suddenly out of the sky they see a circle, very small, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it disappears. And they go and report to their government, the flat Earth, flat stick people government. They had a miracle. They had a miracle happen in downtown stick people land, and the news is all a rave, and they have actual photographs of this. Well, the higher dimensional cube people say, "What's going on in Stickville?" The only thing that happened was my son dropped the ball through their plane, and they saw the ball appear, get bigger, and disappear. That's it. See, good example of how dramatic uh, dramatically different perception can be. And that's not. I mean, this is how this relates to Einstein's theory of relativity. This relates to yeah, looking at multidimensional analysis when you're talking about things like string theory. You know, how do certain particles just appear, and disappear? Well, it's related to that. It's connected to that. That sense of perception based on one person having a higher level of dimensional wise, a higher level of awareness, seeing something that the person at the lower level of perception dimensionally could not even perceive. The stick people that live in the two-dimensional world, they cannot perceive when you say, "What do you mean by what do you mean by ball? What do you mean? What is that?" Like you really couldn't get that through to them. I mean, hell, to talk to them, you got to use like Morse code or something because you know they don't have the same level of vibration that you do in three dimensions. When you talk, you're making the air vibrate like this in three dimensions plus time. They can't do that. So how do you even communicate with? I mean, we could keep going with this. You can see like, holy shit, like how do you even talk to these people? How does their minds work? How does a two-dimensional mind work? You know, the best you could do is think about a computer program, but make no mistake about it. That's three dimensions. A piece of paper, no matter how thin it is three dimensions. A circuit board with transistors and computer processors, Pentium processors, that's flat, but it's three dimensions. So my point is that as you contemplate these things, understand that it really is impossible at this level of awareness for you to imagine what it's like to be the two-dimensional stick person who sees the magical ball appear and disappear in his world. This is the problem every human being faces every day. When we interact with each other at home, at work, as we have loss in our life, this is the concept that will help us sometimes let go. This is this is the type of knowledge and wisdom and insights that help me understand the limits of my own perception, the limits of my understanding, the limits of my cognitive abilities, and that every human being has these limitations, and we're all trying to build a world out here that's stable, balanced, um, accommodating for all human beings, to the degree it can, based on these concepts of fairness and equanimity, charity, altruism, truth, sacrifice. All these concepts came into the creation of our society. But when they play out, we end up with Black Wall Street, 300 years of slavery. And then what people are going to say, economic crisis left and right, Great Depression, et cetera, et cetera. People are going to say, well, everybody deals with this. And what I tell people is simply this: if everybody's sitting down to a nice big bowl of shit and I can smell it and I know what it is, they may be flat planers that like eating it or whatever. I don't care to partake of that. And that may sound like I mean that's just one of the best ways I have to illustrate when people say everybody's done it. Because to me, everybody's done it is one of the stupidest things I ever hear come out of people's mouths. And it gets said a lot when it comes to the context of human suffering. We're always going to have war. We're always going to have this. Well, the vows of spiritual adepts, especially in Buddhism, say we will try to achieve the unachievable. We will use limited faculties to try to experience infinite faculties. This is the vow that's made. And if you understand why the vow is made and what allows you to make it, this is an opportunity for us as human beings to help alleviate our own mental suffering to a degree and then extend that out to those around us. Because that's the way it's going to work. Until we learn to alleviate our own mental suffering via compassion and wisdom, contemplation, right? It's unlikely that we're going to extend that to the environment and the social circles around us. That's why it doesn't happen in real life because people haven't looked at the thing close enough, long enough, patient enough. Patience is a big one, man. Nobody wants to wait for the result. A lot of times when I get in arguments with people, which I recently did, I have to look at them and say, just stop talking for a second and let me fucking think. Because I need to understand all the factors that went into, and honestly, like people will say, well, if you can't keep up, nobody can fucking keep up. Okay, that's the answer. Nobody can keep up with reality. It moves too fast. It moves at speeds that we haven't even talked about. Me- uh, yeah, you can talk about at what level reality is perceptible. So you can get into quantum mechanics, you can get into Planck's constant, you can get into what level of time can be measured with our instruments, including our brain. But you get in trouble if you try to say that's all there is to reality in its totality. That's just the reality maybe that I can experience on this level using machines in my wet brain. There most likely is, and I believe there is a whole another infinite dimension of suchness. And this is why we have to this is why our spiritual masters had to give us these systems. Because they knew that when you try to take the infinite and the finite and talk about them in the same sentence, that you were basically going to be stumbling over your own feet and tongue as you were talking. But because of the suffering of those around you, you attempt to explain the thing using a tool that you know isn't going to work, speech. But anyway, compassion and wisdom, compassion and wisdom. Now, the Kubler Ross told us that as we experience loss, as it relates to death and dying, we're going to go through certain emotional states. If I remember them, I'm going to miss one maybe, but anger. When somebody says you're going to die in 2 weeks, what happens? Anger. People go through depression. Okay, they go through denial, and then finally, after they go through um, bargaining is another phase they go through. Bargaining with God. Well, if you give me another 2 weeks, I'll try to be a better man. Anger, bargaining, depression. And then finally, the last phase is acceptance. Well, anytime we have a great loss in our life, we go through those stages. My insight that wasn't taught to me, it just came by me observing the dying process in hospitals, the sickness that afflicts people, observing it as a clinician, observing myself using yoga, Buddhism, Christianity, psychology as I was taught, learning to use these tools to really take a good look. And it finally, the light went off. The light went off one day. Sorry. What I finally said was, I'll be damned. You go through these phases of death and dying all throughout your life. not just when you have death. It was one of the most profound realizations I've had as a clinician because it allowed me to understand the human condition better. When you understand that what I just went through, a near death experience, I'm going to have to go through all those phases because as people have noticed, yeah, I'm a different person now. Well, of course, there ain't a damn thing I can do about that. Okay, so you got two choices: you either throw my ass, under the curve somewhere because I'm not the person I was before, or together let's understand because guess what? You too will go through this same thing I'm going through right now as a human being. So in a society that was enlightened would say, since everybody's gonna get wet, let's learn about water. Okay, everybody's gonna get wet. Let's learn about water. Okay, but in this society, people postpone thinking about sickness and death, and the conversation turns into like entertainment. I've noticed that it turns into social media kind of conversations, the social media that I don't like, and I won't say which one because they all lack something. Uh, and so to penetrate into the core of why we suffer, we have to have these insights. We have to. When we realize that the woman who just got divorced is angry and depressed, and that's almost exactly the same, but just a different level emotionally, a different level emotionally from death and dying experience, but the same experience. It's the same. And I'm saying that 100% from my experience, not from what I read in a book, not from some fancy psychology book, blah, 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 that was edited by 20 people and thought about. I'm talking, no, this is a realization of looking at life, looking inside of my human reactions objectively, noticing what thousands of human beings go through when they come into the hospital sick and dying. And then seeing that, well, this person ain't sick and dying, but they're having the same damn reaction to losing their house, losing their car, losing shit, some stock, you know, losing their favorite fucking dog. It's the same reaction, people. Okay, just I'm telling you, I'm trying to save you some time. Let me build a bridge for you. Okay, that's what knowledge and wisdom and compassion are about. On one level, let me build a bridge for you. So you ain't got to bungee jump off the goddamn cliff, go into the river, swim across the fucking river that's full of alligators and dangerous animals, climb up the cliff on the other side just to get over. You ain't got to do all that when you use wisdom and realize human beings have similar experiences and they're almost cookbook similar, almost exactly the same, except another human being is going through it at a different phase of his life, different circumstances. Of course, that's a unique experience that nobody else in the whole world has ever experienced. But here we go again with the paradoxes. Life and death, two sides of the same coin, right? My loss, your loss, same flavor, different people. Okay. So those are the insights that we need to feel on a gut level. On a gut level, because I'm telling you, when the emotions kick in, and anger is a big one, it is going to overwhelm your systems of, let's say, cognitive discernment is one. Your ability to be fair, lucid, all of that goes out the window when you have anger and emotional states that arise in conflict, war, divorce, arguments you have with people at work, at home, with family members, on the street. When somebody getting ready to get into a fist fight in the middle of it happens, it has happened. This is part of where the breakdown comes in. It the inability, the inability. I mean, it's so crazy. The other day, I was trying to go to a gas pump, and the person in front of me got there almost exactly the same time, but I had turned all the way around just to get to the pump on the side with the side of my tank facing the gas pump because I had just left another gas station where there was too many people. There's no way in the hell I was gonna sit there when there's another gas station down the street. And as me and the car approached the gas pump, I wasn't sure who got there first. But in my mind, what I said was, I just turned all the way around to come back to this gas station just so my gas pump could be on the right side. So I'm gonna use this fucking gas pump, okay? So the other truck, he kind of just backed up and then he went back around. But I'm not sure. I'm not. He didn't. Nothing was said. We just did it. We were cool about it. Nothing was said. But in my mind, I could have sworn I heard his girlfriend say, "Well, just let it go. Don't worry about it." Okay. Now here's the deal. She may or may not have said it at all because I wasn't sure. Two, she might have been talking about something that happened between them yesterday, today, another time, or something totally unrelated to them. Okay. There's so many levels I before I could say he's talking about me. He trying to step to me because I won't give up my gas pump. And I'm just telling you, this is a good story because this is how people have conflict like this. He's a kind of big dude and he's got muscles and all that. So pretty sure he probably could have strong armed me off the pump if he had really wanted to. But my point is that because of my background in meditation and contemplation, I'm not quick to jump on what I think I heard because I know my hearing is flawed. I know I'm tired. I know that the wind is blowing. I don't know really what the hell she really said. Okay. And overall, you know, he ain't said nothing to me, period. Ain't nothing been said. So why would I react? But I'm just telling you this because I want you to see the similarities in the processes that take place in all of our minds. Because I know some of you at one point are going to go through the same thing. You're going to hear something in a movie theater, out at the gas station, out in public, in a crowded airport, and you're gonna think you heard somebody say something. If they really said it, they'll say it loud to your face, and then you can act appropriately. But our perception is completely flawed, and it's constantly pulling from our own fears. It's constantly pulling from our own sense of lack. That is also based on falsehood. Okay, it's not exactly that way. It's just our survival instincts going overboard, running amok. Our survival instincts have to be checked constantly. That's the reason we teach breath meditation as a tool for every day, every moment. I was talking to my doctor friends about this the other day about grounding, how we ground ourselves using the breath. Because when the when the this has been said by much more eloquent speakers and monks, but yes, the storm that you're preparing for is the emotional storm too, not just the hurricane in nature. The emotional storms that's going to hit you when you're the old woman who has Alzheimer's, who doesn't even have the cognitive abilities anymore to process what's happening to her. She has to hold on to her husband's hands and say, "Don't leave me. Look, I just saw this happen in real life." Because she's so scared that as soon as he leaves the room, she's going to be overwhelmed with simple things like, "I got to go to the bathroom," or "How do I push the button and ask for toilet paper and water?" I mean, stuff that we think is so simple, At another phase of our life might be rocket science. It might be emotionally charged. It might be overwhelming to us. I just have the fortunate background to have seen human beings in these situations over and over again. That's the gift of being in a field where I have to give of myself, medicine. In exchange, I get to witness the human condition and learn from everybody, not just my family and friends, but every person that comes across me. If I allow my heart to remain open and if I remain open minded and just take in what is and don't let my ego flavor it so much, I get lessons that can never be learned anywhere except in human interactions. And it's flawed. It's flawed. Even when it's distilled and purified with knowledge, wisdom, and compassion, it's still flawed. So I can't, if I approach every human being like they're a villain every single time, it's just, we're building the roots of a failed society when we do that. But yet and still, we all want to be treated fairly. We all want to be treated with respect. We all want people to understand when we're being pushed to our limits, past our limits. Because in this society we live in, you will be asked to move beyond your limits. You will be asked to do this over and over again, as a matter of fact. And so the problem with that is our sense of attachment. Attachment, especially in Buddhism, is definitely taught as being the main source of suffering. Inability to let shit go and just let it, you know. I don't know what it does, but me chasing it and me staying on it, it most definitely 100%. 1 billion, as Rude Jude said yesterday. 1 billion. Keep it 100. 1 billion. 1 million is the main source of my mental battles that I have to fight. That's the main source. So hold on a second. I need to go back up here and look at my feed. So the loss that we go through, there is an emotional roller coaster ride that we all go through on subtle levels and gross levels. Kubler Ross talked about it. Psychologically, it happens in any type of loss. But when you contemplate and when you pray and meditate, you might want to take a look at that emotional reaction in every phase of your existence. So look at how you react if someone takes $100 out of your pocket and it's not theirs. You're gonna go through those phases real fast, and it may skip a few and go straight to anger. Right? You took something from me; it's mine. You know, but we need to notice the psychological reactions to perceived loss before we can have any insight and any ability to have a victory over this type of reactionary mentality. What I wrote the other day was that I wrote this in the midst of me really struggling with everybody I was at work with. I mean, I was struggling. I was using these tools. And I said something to the effect of what I wrote was, I've, I've been a poet my whole life, and poetry is one of the main vehicles of expression that I have. And this was just prose, but it sounded poetic the way I wrote it. And I said, wisdom and compassion are the only shield we've ever had. Knowledge, knowledge is the only sword we ever had. And I said when we drop these on the battlefield, before we get to the battlefield, the battle is lost before we even get to the battlefield, and we don't know it. So when we're interacting with other human beings, other sentient beings, and we don't have the shield of wisdom and compassion, the sword of knowledge and truth, the sword of knowledge and truth, then the quality of what comes out of those interactions is what I call low quality. This is like malt liquor and not aged Hennessy that comes out. Okay, it's like rancid ass butter and rotten carcass meat as opposed to filet mignon and prime rib. Okay, it's cubic zirconias that have been run through the mill and not, you know, top notch diamonds that have been refined by a master jeweler. Okay, that's the quality of what comes out of human interactions when they don't have this type of discernment. And when one person has reached a certain level, here's the problem: you're not necessarily gonna be able to stay there, because the woman who is afraid to use the bathroom by herself probably didn't see that coming when she was 25 years old, 30, 40 years old. She is each one of us. So our compassion comes from understanding that she is each one of us. 100%, 1 billion, 1 million. And when you understand that intellectually, it still has to sink into the heart. And after it sinks into the heart, it needs to get into the bones. After it gets to the bones, it needs to get into the bone marrow. And then one day you become that. But until then, these are the tools that we have to use to create equanimity, balance. These are the tools that are the seeds of compassion and wisdom. The thing is interlinked across the board. So if we don't spend time in meditation, and insight meditation is different than stabilization meditation. Insight meditation is akin to the process that I'm going through right now with you. It's meditating on a concept, compassion, wisdom, equanimity, in the instances in my life when I either had or didn't have. In an instance that doesn't exist yet, but this is how it works. I imagine myself there. This gets almost in the tantra, really, how deep it gets. I look at the situation where the person that I wanted to punch in the face yesterday, now I extend the same compassion that I give to my baby daughter to that person. Because I understand these things, I don't 100% understand exactly what you're seeing, but I'm trying to. And I need the emotional states of anger and bewilderment to not take over while I'm using these tools. Because what happens is those emotional states, they don't give you time. You got the tool bag. See, I learned this recently. Everything is a lesson, man. I got the tool bag, but sometimes I don't have time to get to it, because that's how quick the reactionary mind that we've conditioned over millions of years for survival, fight or flight. It's great if I'm in the jungle and I need some gazelle meat and the lions after me. Not so great when I'm talking to another human being and we're just trying to figure out how do we smooth this out so we can all function and not feel overwhelmed, not feel slighted, not feel disrespected, not feel abused, not feel like our human rights are being fucking trampled on. How do we do that? I think the process that religions, philosophy, and law, medicine, psychology, the meditative arts, they've all given us music, trance states, drumming, ethnogens, all of it. It's all a tool. It's all a tool. And we have to figure out based on where we're at and our background and our culture which tools work best for us. That's why the Dalai Lama said, "Don't jump your religion and go to mine. Use yours, but use yours at the highest level." And honestly, the problem in America, my generation, we had to grow up going to church. We got our asses whooped, and just to be honest with you, and I ain't saying it's right or wrong, but we did. So the consequences for making wrong decisions were different. You know, it wasn't that I could just go and demand my teachers treat me a certain way. And what I see now is authority figures are being challenged. And the funny thing is, I don't really think we're the authority figures that created the problem. We inherited it. We inherited some of the same behaviors as the authority figures before us because that's the way it works. But we didn't really create this system. But now we're going to have to deal with, the repercussions of our forefathers creating this system that probably wasn't as fair to women, minorities, people that weren't in the higher socioeconomic areas, not in management, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we got to deal with it. And it's going to be challenging. It's going to be challenging because we grew up in a system where we learned first respect and obey authority. Then later on, we'll teach you why. Okay, that's the system I grew up in. And now we're in a system where I don't necessarily want to respect and obey authority because if I don't feel like that authority is doing its job, then I don't want to, give it, my life, my blood, my attention, and my love. But I'm just gonna say for what needs to be said. The same way you are Monday should be the same way you are Friday when it comes to utilizing justice and fairness. And it's difficult for every human being. We tend to we tend to look at certain human beings and say, "Oh, I want to be fair with them," and then the next human being will say, "Well, have they really earned that for me?" No, that's not the way it works, man. It's not, and we have to acknowledge that. Okay, compassionate wisdom is the approach for you. It's the approach for me. It's the approach when I look at a rock. It's the approach when I look at a baby or a fellow human being. When it's not part of the process, what comes out is of low quality. It's of low quality. And most often in the situation where there's two or three human beings, some are going to be more advanced and learned and wise, and some are going to be less. And then what happens in this reality is the ones that are more advanced today, tomorrow, they might not be. And so in an ideal situation, everyone would have learned this before we end up in whatever situation we're in. And in some cases in history, it was taught. Look, the Chinese with Confucianism and Taoism. That's what that's about, man. The young men learn this so they know how to conduct business in a fair way, in a way that's balanced and culturally. This is according to us, and from what I know about it, is true. This is probably one of the best ways to conduct business and political, interactions. And then when you get older, here's a system based on more of what I consider to be a philosophical, metaphysical, spiritual, even tribal on some levels, most definitely, tradition, so that an older man can shed the affairs of the state and focus on his soul, focus on his mind, focus on his Buddha nature. But we're in a situation in society where we're not really necessarily being allowed to transition easily from work work years to retirement years because everything is more expensive. We're all brainwashed into thinking we need more than we really need, and we do it, you know. And it's not just as simple as, well, you made the mistake, you pay for it. If that was the case, everybody everybody would be pretty much guilty. Period. Period. So compassionate wisdom says, don't make those kind of statements unless you have to. Unless you have to. If you're a boss at work and you think you got to say you know when somebody has an obvious mistake, you should be able to state the obvious mistake. But If the situation is complex, it's going to require. Look, why do you think upper level managers get involved when there's conflict on the job? Because what they're trying to do is you want the most seasoned, uh, well trained, worldly, traveled, experienced person to look at the situation. And if it doesn't work at that level, it goes up the ranks. That system is based on how we view the world. Things going up the ranks. If we can't solve the problem at this level, we kick it up to this level, and boom, 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 until finally, we have a solution. No problem. It's beautiful when it works, but when each level is completely racked with problems, like in our government, problems going up the chain don't necessarily lead to solutions. And since the chain is really like a circular Jacob's ladder, if you will, I mean, that goes up and down, then sometimes we got to say, okay, we need to go back down. We need to come back down to the rung of the bottom rung of the ladder and get a viewpoint from there. Because trying to get it up from up there is, whew, it's not working up there. All right. So yeah, suffering exists. There are causes of suffering. Suffering can come to an end if we use a spiritual path that gives us, right view, right understanding, right speech, right actions, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, right meditation. Each one of those rights is a lifetime of work, and there's 8 of them. How do we balance out each one of those things? If the eightfold path wasn't important, why did the Buddha give it to us? You know, I mean, you got people out here saying the Buddha, Jesus, and all those people didn't exist. Don't really matter because what they gave us is solid. Whoever they were, it don't really matter. People out here trying to get you distracted, man. They're trying to give you something to solve problems with that may or may not be a good tool. You have to use your discernment and your knowledge and your heart and your wisdom to decide whether you're going to accept that knowledge and wisdom based on your insights as to whether or not something that looks like it works. I use a spoon until I learn what a ladle is. I come from a tribe where we don't have ladles. I stir my soup with a spoon, and the spoon gets hot and it burns my hand. But I gotta wait. Then when it cools down, I stir it again. Okay, and it's really small, so I can't stir the bottom of the bowl. But then somebody says, "Hey, you want to use this big wooden ladle? Because wood doesn't conduct heat, and it's big, and you can stir your soup real fast, right?" If you don't know, you don't know, and you may know now, and in 20 years you won't know for whatever reason. You get Alzheimer's disease. You get brain damage. You play professional football and you got hit one too many times. You use too many drugs and alcohol. You've been depressed for so long that you've got a vegetative form of depression that leads to dementia. These are all real life situations that happen every day to real human beings that look like you and me. Wisdom and compassion is the only key. I don't know any other tool. I haven't found another tool that supersedes that. When I do, I will tell you. I will. But until then, enjoy your Sabbath, compassion and wisdom. Don't be so hard on yourself. Because sometimes we just got to learn how to step back from a situation, take a deep breath, realize we were born and we're going to die, realize we were never born and we never die, right? Wisdom. And it's like, sometimes it's like putting a few drops of water on a forest fire emotionally. Wisdom. But sometimes that those few drops of water are just the beginning of the storm. And if you wait another 10 minutes, you got a whole thunderstorm over you helping you put the fire out. Because that's what's up there. All that wisdom that you in your life have meditated on, contemplated, tried to use to the highest level, you think it's not there to help you. You think it's failing because the situation gets emotionally charged. But give it time. It's a few drops right now. At some point, it may be an ocean of wisdom. Namaste. Till next time. Peace.